Mr. Siebel, now the floor goes to you for 10 minutes for your presentation, please.
Yes, Madam Chair, distinguished members of the committee, thank you very much for having me with you and allowing me to present and discuss the recent work that Cedefop has done in connection with the corona crisis. I have handed in a set of slides, which I don't know, I can't present here today. I know this is technically not possible. Some of you may have it in front of you, so I will frequently refer to the slides that I'm currently covering. But if you don't have them, it will also be possible to follow, don't worry. The pandemic crisis has arrived at a time when the EU economy was already in the midst of a transition period. While in 2019, in the EU 27, the employment rate actually peaked at 73.1%. Employment growth had already lost some of its momentum. So it has only increased by 0.7% as compared to the 1.1% we saw on the average of the previous 3 years. And today, the near-term outlook of economic activity has sharply deteriorated, as we all know, and has become highly uncertain. And uncertainty, as we know, affects the expectations of both consumers and enterprises, and may actually also lead to self-fulfilling prophecy effects. In this context, a higher skilled and better motivated workforce is key to rebuild the EU economy. And as always in times of economic crisis, vocational education and training can play a crucial role to prepare all people for the inevitable transformations of the economy. And not only that, vocational education and training can also be a driver of change. It will help our societies, we believe, to master the challenges ahead of us. But first, let's reassure people. As you have heard from my colleague Juan Menendez from Eurofound, who spoke to you in one of your last meetings, there's growing awareness about the exposure to potential shocks, and that is fueling a deep sense of vulnerability, not only among the young generations, but among all Europeans that are directly hit by this crisis. So investing in vocational education and training, and in education and training more generally, is the best option, we believe, to inspire some confidence, to show citizens how we trust in the future of our economies, how we value their contribution, whether they are students, workers, professionals, or entrepreneurs. With this in mind, Cedefop reacted quite quickly as soon as the crisis started, and now I'm moving to my second slide. And our COVID-related work is actually grouped in 3 different groups. So there's some instant research where new pieces of evidence drawn directly from our networks or from the databases we maintain or from our resources are depicted. Then there's also evidence-based reflections that are a bit more in-depth and also look at key trends and policy pointers. And lastly, there's our usual business of in-depth analysis, international surveys, and some forthcoming research work that we can look at. But please allow me first to take you through a brief flip through of a few findings of this first category. So first impressions, new findings that we had. And for this, you would have to move to slide 3 with the first example, and that is from Europass data that we maintain. We have seen that the number of CVs that have been uploaded lately in the last months has gone down more than 30% in more than 8 of our countries. And we see that this is, first of all, a big loss in the confidence in job opportunities. And don't forget, this is only looking at the supply side of the labor market. So that is already an astonishing effect, we believe. Moving quickly on to the next slide, number 4, asking the question, well, if the confidence has gone from the job market, where has it gone? One option is towards online training. As these Google search results that are depicted on this slide suggest, there's an increase in about 80% in the respective search activity for online learning courses that happened with the beginning of the crisis. Another aspect is looking at the apprenticeships. That would be slide 4 of my presentation. So the lockdowns have, of course, locked down vet schools, vet labs, and also in-company training. And Cedefop has asked its community of apprenticeship experts to provide a rapid initial assessment of how the coronavirus has actually affected the provision of vocational training in their country or region. And there's a few facts that we found very quickly. First, let's start with what vet providers did say. Well, providers have quickly tried to move online for learning, but this is a kind of ad hoc response, piecemeal sometimes, and for different purposes. Once, of course, keeping in touch with students, providing them access to resources, documents, videos, etc., but also for actual teaching. And also for providers, the crisis has emphasized how well they need to coordinate with the companies with whom they exchange students, because now under different conditions, different lockdown scenarios, both at the industry and at the vet providers, you may have to shift both students and learning content between the two places of learning. And that, of course, requires some kind of agility and also a high degree of coordination. Looking at companies, how have they reacted? Well, there the reactions are very different depending on which sector we're talking. So for some, there has been complete continuity of apprentices working on their premises, in particular in fields such as healthcare and food, of course, because they are termed as the so-called essential sectors. Vice versa, in sectors like hospitality, well-being, and tourism, it's the complete opposite. So their learning on the job has literally ceased to exist. So those are the challenges that these companies are now facing. And there's also another challenge that depends on the respective vocational education training model. So in companies, if they close, if the apprentices have contracts that are regulated under the labor code, then of course they are covered by labor market measures. But apprentices without such contracts, they, if at all, receive stipends or subsidies or state grants. And otherwise, if there's no effect, of course, then apprentices are paid as usual. Moving to the next result would be on slide 6, where we look at guidance, because, of course, with the labor market in such turmoil as it is today, career guidance will even be more critical, we believe, in assisting young people and adults to navigate. Cedefop has asked the experts from its so-called Careers network on lifelong guidance and career development to provide a rapid initial assessment of how the coronavirus has affected guidance in their country or region. And a few points stand out here. First of all, again, a leap towards digitalization, since face-to-face guidance services were mostly restricted. There's also an increase in the diversification of the communication channels of these career guidance professionals, as has been seen that those countries that already have a kind of multi-channel capacity, they were also much quicker in adopting to the new normal of guidance practice. Then there have also been significant efforts to ensure universal access for all user groups in order to contain as much as possible risks of deepening social inequalities, such as the digital divide, psychological barriers, or even special needs. The growing importance of digital competences for guidance professionals themselves is also on the table here, because this needs to be built, particularly through focused training and support initiatives. And last but not least, also guidance professionals had to cooperate well with other stakeholders, and some of them are completely new, like digital service providers, broadcasters, others that we now need to reach out to our consumer base, if you will. Building all of this, we are also conducting a survey, which will then be in our more long-term work and looking at, amongst other things, guidance provision and supply, types of adapted services, guidance in recovery plans and policies, and those first results will hopefully soon be available. Moving on to the next finding would be looking at sectors and occupations. That's slide number 7 in the slide set. The coronavirus crisis has also is also likely to reinforce automation. So it's like a double effect that we're seeing here, according to Cedefop skills forecast. The sectors with medium and high or high impact of coronavirus on our economic activity will have around 1/5 to 1/4 of the newly created jobs being at risk of automation. That would mean 1.4 million jobs until 2030 in the EU 27. I'm speeding up a little because I think my time is running at the moment. We also have a finding on page 8 on early leaving. I may want to skip that, but it's in the slides and I can answer questions later on. Sorry, because I wanted to go on to slide 9, where we have a one-slide overview of the key trends and policy pointers based on our evidence. Some reflections here. So here we have a few headline questions that we are answering research-wise, like why our heroes will never be automated. Things like, has the coronavirus turned us all into crowd workers? We're looking at things that will human capital potential of refugees be better used after COVID-19. Then we're looking at jobs at risk, particularly in the tourism sector, and also the automation and future of work line that I already mentioned in one of the earlier findings. In this context, it's important to say that we're looking at all of these research projects always with the look at the impact on skills provision, and at vocational education and training policy responses in support to social and economic recovery. Finally, and that will be my last factual slide, is the in-depth analysis. So this is often, that's slide number 10, that is mostly survey work, it's mostly long cycle and long term. However, now it's fully COVID mainstreamed, if you will, to maintain and improve its relevance. And here we're looking at 3 examples. For instance, the coronavirus learning the lessons, preparing for the future. That's a global survey on the impact of the pandemic on learning in companies. It's launched with a number of renowned organizations besides the European Commission and our sister agency ETF. It's also with the International Center for Career Development and Public Policy, with ILO, with OECD and UNESCO. Second study is European countries' response to coronavirus challenge. That's an ongoing work with our ReferNet group, looking at national responses. And then finally, there's also a question on will coronavirus have lasting labor market effects? Here we're going to use the next edition of the European Skills and Jobs Survey, covering all the relevant coronavirus aspects of jobs and skills. Finally, I would like to wrap this up with a few remarks. This has only been a snapshot that I could present to you on the corona-related work that we've done so far. I ask you to please check our publications and website for details. And also to stay tuned, because we're generating more results as we speak. Corona crisis, we believe, must be dealt with now. Its economic fallout must be forecast now, and the recovery must be planned for and supported now. And because of its pivotal role in the fields of labor market, vocational training, and skills intelligence, Cedefop will have to deliver critical contributions to the post-corona crisis recovery efforts of the Union, and we have to start doing this now. We will help policymakers to assess the impact of the crisis on vet systems and how the latter will be used to overcome the former. Thank you very much for your attention.